Hi everyone, and welcome to the video presentation for module number 17. In this module we'll be talking about the 5/7 chord in inversion, which sounds harder than what we did before, but it's actually a lot easier. So first we'll learn how to resolve inversions of 5/7 in the correct way, and then we'll work on how to create and resolve inversions of 5/7 in context, so what they look like in kind of actual music. Okay, so let's review the different inversions you can have of a 7th chord, and particularly the 5/7 chord. So as you remember, all 7th chords, including the 5/7 chord, can be inverted. And because the 5/7 has 4 notes, right? Every 7th chord has 4 notes instead of the 3 that a triad has. That means that you can invert the 5/7 4 different ways. So it has 4 possible positions, including the root position. So the one we're most familiar with is the root position 7th chord. So this here is in the key of G, and this is the 5/7 of that key. So this is a D7 chord. And since it's all a stack of thirds, right, it looks like a snowman, we say that that is a root position 7th chord. Okay, so to note here is that the bass note is the root, and this will become really important in a second. And the figured bass, right, so the number that would appear under that, the bass note for that chord would be just the number 7. So all of that indicates a root position 5/7 chord. And that's the one we were dealing with last time. So it's also possible to take the bottom note of the chord and move it to the top of the chord, which would change the note that is in the bass. So you could invert this by taking that bottom D and moving it to the top of the chord, and therefore the F sharp would now be the new bass note, but this would still be a 5/7 chord. And when we do that, we call this a first inversion chord. So here is this exact same chord, but I've just inverted it. I've taken the bottom note and put it on top. And now it's still D7, and you could call it D7 over F sharp, I guess. But in the Roman numeral, you'd call it 5/6/5. And so the important part is that the bass note now is the third, not the root. And the figured bass for this would be that F sharp with the number 6/5 under it. Okay, and you can do this again. You can take that bottom F sharp and you can move that to the top. So I'm going to take this bottom F sharp, move it to the top of the chord, and this becomes the next inversion, which will be the second inversion. And now the 5th of my chord is in the bass. 5th of my chord is now the lowest note. And the figured bass for this is now 4/3. So you write 5/4/3, and the way this chord would appear in a figured bass would be that note A with the number 4/3 under it. But it's still a 5/7 chord, it's just in second inversion. Okay? And then since this chord has 4 notes, we can do this one more time before we get back to a root position chord by taking that A, moving it to the top, and that will put my note C in the bass. So now I end up with the third inversion 5 chord. So this is a 5/4/2, and the thing about this is that it has its 7th in the bass. So its 7th is the lowest note. Okay, and the figured bass for this would be 4/2. So you would see this in figured bass as the note C with the number 4/2 under it, which would indicate it's a 5/7 chord, but it is in third inversion, so it would be a 5/4/2 chord. Okay, so that's a review of how inversions work. That's something we did last time. Now, this becomes important because you remember from last time, it's really important how we treat each of those notes of the chord. So knowing which note is in the bass is really an important thing to know. So resolving the dominant 7th chord in inversion is actually easier than it is in root position. And that's because both of the chords can be complete, and the voice leading mistakes are easy to avoid because there's really no decisions to make with this resolution. It has to do one thing. And so all you have to remember is, like last time, the 7th of the chord, no matter where it is, resolves down by a step. Now notice I'm saying the 7th of the chord, right? So this is the 7th of the chord in root position, but it could be not necessarily in root position. So that 7th could be in the bass, right? Or that 7th could be in the alto. So it's not necessarily going to be in one place or the other. And it's not necessarily going to be a seventh above the bass note either, right? So I'm not saying it's the seventh above the bass note. I'm saying it's the seventh above, or the seventh of the chord, right? Okay, so that's an important distinction. Now, you also have to remember that the third of the chord resolves up by step. And again, I'm saying of the chord, not above the bass, right? Because those are two different things. So this is the third of the chord resolving up by a step. And then the other notes will either move by a step or repeat. And that's all you have to remember when you're resolving these things, are those three things. So seventh resolves down by step, third resolves up by step, and the other notes will either repeat or move by step. Okay. So let's talk about the first inversion 5/7, so resolving the 5/6/5. So remember that 5/6/5 would look like this. It's our first inversion chord. The bass note is the third, and the figured bass is 6/5. So in our example here, we have, again, in the key of G, we have this 5/6/5 chord, and it sounds like this. Okay. And just remember that we need to resolve the seventh down by a step, the third needs to resolve up by step, and the other notes will move by step or repeat. So then the question is, where are those notes? Where's the seventh? Where's the third of this chord? Well, the most important thing we know is that the bass note is the third of the chord. So that means that the third, right? Third of the chord resolves up by a step. So that third will need to move up by a step. Okay, and so if we look at our chord here, we see that that's F sharp. So F sharp is the third of this chord, because remember this is in the key of G. And this is a D7 chord, but it's in first inversion, so this is D7 over F sharp. And so the third of my chord is in the bass. The third of a seventh chord always resolves up by step, so that F sharp has to move to the note G. Okay. The next thing to do is find the seventh. So the seventh of the chord resolves down by a step, and this is still a D7 chord, so the seventh is going to be the note C. So that is in my tenor, so that C needs to move down to a B. And then the other notes of the chord will either move by step or repeat based on the best voice leading, right? And so this is a 1 chord in the key of G, so that's a G major chord. So I can resolve this completely by moving this A in the alto down to the note G to double my root. And then I would repeat this, the root of the chord, as the fifth of the new chord here. So I move down by step and I repeat it. And I moved my third up by step and my seventh down by step. So just to reiterate, third, which was that F sharp, resolved up by step. Seventh, which was the C, moved down by a step. This A moved down by a step, and this D repeated. And so we get a nice, correct resolution of a 5/6/5 to 1. There you go. So that's why it's important to know which note of the chord is in the bass, because then you know how to treat that note. Okay. Let's look at another example. So that was 5/6/5. Let's look at the next inversion, which is 5/4/3. Now this one actually can go one of two ways, but let's talk about this. So 5/4/3. Here's an example of 5/4/3. Now this is our second inversion chord. The bass note is the fifth, and the figured bass is 4/3. And again, we're going to be doing all these things, moving the seventh down by step, moving the third up by step, and the other notes will repeat or move by step. So let's figure out what key we're in here. We have 2 sharps. This is a 5 leading to a 1. So that means that I'm in a minor key because that 1 is lowercase. So this will be the key of B minor. So a 5 chord in B minor is going to be the chord F sharp 7. And I see from my figured bass that this is 5/4/3. So that means that the fifth of my chord will be in the bass. So this is actually an F sharp over C sharp, which is what you see because my bass note is C sharp. And then that means that this needs to go to a 1 chord, which is the B minor triad. So we're moving a F sharp 7 over C sharp to B minor chord. Okay, and we're doing it by following all these rules. Now, we don't really care too much. Well, the bass note can do whatever we want, right? But it might not be the best note to start with because we might have to make a decision, right? So the fifth is not one of the notes that needs to do something, right? The notes that need to do something are the seventh of the chord and the third of the chord. And the fifth can kind of do either. It can repeat or move by step, depending on the situation. So we'll leave that alone for now. And let's find the seventh and the third of the chord and worry about those first, since those are the most important things. So let's start with the seventh of the chord. So this is an F sharp 7 chord. So the seventh of that chord is going to be E. And looking through this chord, I see that my seventh is up here in my soprano. So seventh needs to resolve down by step. So that E needs to resolve down to the note D. And then, so that's done, check. Now the third of the chord needs to resolve up by a step. And the third of my F sharp 7 chord will be the note A sharp. And I see that here in my tenor. So that needs to move up to B. Okay. Notice they always move in contrary motion to each other. So the third of the chord and the seventh of the chord will always move opposite to each other. Okay. Now let's figure out what we need to do next. So the other notes will need to move by step or repeat. And so this F sharp is the root of my 5 chord. And since I need the F sharp to be in the 1 chord, in my B minor chord, I can just repeat that. And then my C sharp is my 5th. So that could, if we wanted it to, could go down to the B, which would give us our root position 1 chord. And that would sound like this. Which sounds nice. It could also go up to the D, and you could double the third. So there are 2 options with a 4/3 chord. It could go to a root position 1, but it could also go to a 1/6, so a first inversion triad, if we wanted it to, and that would sound like this. Which sounds nice too. So with the 5/4/3, because we don't have one of the tendency tones, right? We don't have the tendency tone in the bass, it could really go either direction, right? And both would be correct. So the 5th could either move down to, excuse me, the tonic, or it could move up to become the 3rd. Either way, right? So with the 5/4/3, you have options. With that last one, since the 3rd was in the bass, right? With that 5/6/5, the only option was to go to the root position chord. Okay. All right, so let's look at the last one. And the last one is like the 5/6/5 because you don't really have any options with it. You have to resolve it one particular way. And that's the 5/4/2. So 5/4/2 is the 3rd inversion 5 chord, and the bass note is the 7th, which is one of the tendency tones, and the figured bass is 4/2. And so we'll do all those things again. 7th goes down by step, 3rd goes up by step, other notes move by step or repeat. And so let's figure out what key we're in for this example. This is 1 flat, and we end on a capital 1 there. So this is the key of F major. And the 5 chord in the key of F major is a C chord, C7. And I see that I have a B flat in the bass. So this is C7 over B flat. And now that needs to resolve a particular way. And this is 5/4/2, which means that the 7th is in the bass. And if we remember our rule, 7th has to resolve down by a step. So that B flat has to go down to the note A. And you'll notice that that is not the root of the 1 chord, right? That's the 3rd of the 1 chord. So this 5/4/2, because it has a 7th in the bass, and that 7th has to move down by a step, has to always resolve to a 1/6 chord. Okay. All right, now all the rest of the things need to happen too. So the 3rd of the chord needs to resolve up by a step, and the 3rd of the chord is the note E. So that will move up to my root F. The other notes can move by step or repeat. And so let's see what the best thing to do is. This C exists in my 1/6, so I'll repeat that. And this G, we could move it either way because it's the 5th. So we could move it down to double the F, and that's probably what I'll do. So there's a good resolution of 542, which has to go to A16. That's a nice one. Okay. Great. Now, let's kind of look at what the book or the examples ask you to do. And this is sort of putting these 5/7s into some kind of context, because we were just kind of isolating it by having one chord move to the next chord. In this example, you're given a key, you're given a blank for a chord, you're given the kind of 5 chord they want, and then the blank for the resolution of that 5 chord. You're also given this letter, which tells you how to create the 7th of the chord. And so P just means passing tone. So we did this last time too. We're going to be creating the 7th as a passing tone. This S over here means suspension. We'll just write sus. That seems appropriate. So that S means suspension. We'll be creating that 7th as some kind of thing that looks like a suspension. And then up here we have space for our lead sheet symbols. Okay, so let's jump in and see if we can figure this out. Now, this is the key of A major, so one of the first things you want to do is write in your key signature. So that's 3 sharps. All right, and then the next thing I would do is figure out where the 7th is. So what note is the 7th? And worry about creating that and kind of maybe center things around that. So figure that out first, and then figure out the rest of what's going on here, the rest of what you're going to do. So it says 5/6/5 in the key of A. So you could use the lead sheets to kind of figure that out. So the key of A, right, the 5 chord would be an E chord. So let's write that up here. And it's the 7th chord, so we'll say E7. And it's 6/5, which is first inversion, so that's E7 over G sharp. So that gives you a lot of information to start with. We know that my bass note's going to be a G sharp. We know that this chord's going to be an E7. And so that tells me kind of what notes I need to put in here and resolve. So it says we need to create this 7th as a passing tone. So maybe start with that 7th, and I'll kind of write it in the middle. And so the 7th of an E7 chord is going to be the note D. And so you could really write this anywhere. Maybe for simplicity's sake, I'll write it up here in the soprano. Okay, so I'm going to write D, which is the 7th, in the soprano. Okay, now it says create it with a passing tone. So that just means that it needs to come from a note above and then move on to a new note, just kind of like a passing tone looks like. So that means that the note right before the 7th should be the note E. So that's a passing tone, and then it needs to go on to continue to be a passing tone. So that D would need to resolve down by step, because it's the 7th, to a C sharp. So that might be the first thing you write is, doing the passing tone part of this. So I know that this needs to go E, D, which is the 7th, and then to the C sharp. Okay? So that might be the first thing that you do. So done with that. Now, from there, you might want to write the bass note and maybe pick a chord for here. So the bass line has to be a G sharp. So I'll write that here in my bass. And that's the 3rd of the chord, so that will need to resolve up to the note A. And that makes this a 1 chord in root position. All right, and then you need to pick a chord that would come before this. And this might be the tricky part, because we don't necessarily, there's a lot of different ways you could do it. There's a few chords that could lead to the 5 chord, right? And some of those might be like a 4 chord, a 2 chord, maybe a 1 chord, right? Those are 3 possibilities that could lead to 5. There are others as well, but those are probably the easiest ones. So which one of those 3 would work? Well, the 1 chord is A major. And so that A major has our soprano note in it, so that could work. That's a possibility. The 2 chord in this key would be B minor, and B minor does not have an E in it, so that's not going to work. And then the 4 chord is going to be the D, right? D major. And that also doesn't have an E in it, so those two possibilities don't work. So the best choice might be just a 1 chord. So let's just stick with that. We'll do 1 here. So we'll go 1, 5, 6, 5, 1, which is really simple, and that's what we want. So we'll put the note A here to indicate my bass note. So now I have my 3 voices, my bass and my soprano. So let's fill in the rest. Okay, you could start at the end because we know how this 5, 6, 5 needs to resolve. So, you know, you could just kind of pick. We have our 3rd and our 7th. We need a root, so that's going to be the note E. And let's give that to our tenor, maybe. Actually, I don't like that. Let's not do that. Let's give it to the alto. So alto gets the root. And now that E exists in our 1 chord, so you could just repeat that. We need a 5th for this chord, and that's the note B, so you could give that to your tenor. And that could move down by a step to double my bass note. So that would work. Okay, now I need to create this 1 chord. And again, there's some things I can repeat. So I could keep the E between the 2 chords. And then I need a 3rd for this chord, so I need a C sharp. So that's the best way, I think, to do that. And I end up with this. It's a really nice, simple resolution of that 5, 6, 5. Okay, great. Now to our one with the sus here. So this is the key of E minor. We need a chord to go here, 5 chord to go here, chord here, and then our lead sheet. So let's start with our key signature. And the key signature for E minor is 1 sharp. Okay, so with this, it's saying to create the 7th chord, the 7th of the chord with a suspension. And now this is 5, 4, 2, which means that the 7th needs to be in the bass. So we could just go ahead and start with that. Now, in the key of E, let's figure out what this chord is. So in the key of E, the 5 chord is a B7 chord. And this is saying 5, 4, 2. So the 7th of that chord is going to be in the bass, which will be A. So we need an A for our bass. So I'll put that here. And we need to create that through some kind of suspension looking thing, which means it comes from repeating the note. So that means that the note before that has to be that same A, and then it has to resolve down to become a G. And so there's my suspension part of this. So that means that my last chord is going to be a 1, 6, because this will be an E minor chord over, over G, okay? And I need a chord to come before my 5, 4, 2. And we listed some chords that can work before a 5, which include our 4 chord. Now I'm writing these as they are in a minor key. A 2 diminished and a 1 chord. Okay, so which one of those would have the note A in it? Well, a 1 chord is an E minor triad, so that does not have the note A in it, so that will not work. The 2 diminished is a F sharp diminished chord, so that actually would work. So F sharp diminished is a possibility. And then the 4 chord is a minor chord, is an A minor chord. And that definitely has an A in it, so that would work too. So we have 2 choices. I might stick with just the 4 chord to keep this a little bit simpler, which means I'll be writing an A minor chord here. All right. So from here, you have to kind of come up with a soprano line and fill in the rest of the voices. So this is going to be a 4. Whoops. That's right. 4 chord. So let's see here. We're going to need a leading tone first. So the leading tone of a B is the note D sharp. So I could go ahead and write that in my soprano just to keep things easy. So notice I'm writing my tendency tones in outer voices to make sure that I resolve them. All right. So then the note that can come before D sharp, you might think it would be C, but that creates that augmented second thing, so that is not going to work. So the only possibility for something that can come before that D sharp is actually an E. So we'll write E here. Okay. All right, now we need to fill in the rest of this with our tenor and our alto. And so let's go to that 7 chord and see what we can do there. So we have our 7th, we have our 3rd, we need a root, and that's going to be the note B. And let's change it up here. So we'll give it to the alto. And then the 5th of the chord will be the note F sharp. Now, that won't work because that F sharp is pretty high. So actually, I did not make the right choice there. Let's change that up. So we'll give the F sharp to our alto, and we'll give the B to our tenor. All right, and then from there, things either repeat or move by steps, so that B stays the same between the 2 chords because you need a B in the E minor chord. That F sharp can move down to become the E here. All right, and then from here, create good lines. So we need a 3rd for this 4 chord, a 3rd for the A minor chord. So I'll give that to my tenor. And then we need to double the root. So you could probably just give that to, a better choice. So you could give the alto that A, which creates this sort of not bad line, very alto line. Another choice would be to double the 5th in this case. So give the note E to your alto, and that creates a little bit better voice leading, I think. So let's listen to this. Yeah, I think that worked really well. Okay, nice. So that's what you do. With these guys, you figure out what they want. So they want the 7th created by a passing tone. So I did that first, right? I decided what voice I would put that in, and I created it with a passing tone. Then I picked, okay, well, what notes could work with that chord? Figured that out, and then kind of wrote my bass from there, and then I kind of fleshed out all the rest of it to make all the chords complete. Okay, there you go. So hopefully that was helpful. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all in our next Zoom session. Have a great day.